So, tips for better quality when you work with static lighting. Use GPU light mask when you can. Once more, you've got that hardware issue, if that makes any sense. So use GPU light mask in order to bake your scene and enable viewport real-time on. This will allow you to see real-time changes while the engine is baking the lighting in your scene. What does this mean, basically? So when you build the light, when you use the CPU light mask, you basically cannot do any changes to the actual scene while it's baking or building the light, if that makes any sense. With the GPU light mask, you are able to actually move around objects, or you're able to literally move around the light, and it will start the process again of building. We'll see that in a moment. Always use a light mask importance volume when baking your lighting, as it helps with time. It helps with time. Why? Because this is one of the volumes that Unreal has, and basically what you will need to do is you will set this volume around the area that everything is going to be happening. Because if you've got a really big environment and then you just build the light, there is going to be millions of bounces around, and it's going to take a lot of time for that scene to be baked or built. So with a light mask importance volume, you're going to kind of say to Unreal, hey, in this spot over here, I want to concentrate all of the bounces over there. The rest of the scene will still get some, but not as many. So that's going to help with time. And then this one, last one, the light mask portals, you can set them within the level on windows and doors, so they will help with the bumping of the light that comes through them. So sometimes if you've got like an interior and the light is coming from outside, I'm gonna say you should be, or it's a recommendation to have light mask portals on the windows and on the doors, so the light that comes through, it's gonna be even better. So you're going to get a more realistic outcome of that. So this is pre-computed GI. As you can see, this is a quick video. So basically, this is how the GPU light mask works. You can see how you've got the progress bars over there, and then you can actually move stuff around, and the engine will start again building the light. Once more, this is one of the ways of building the light or baking the light. This is the GPU one, so this is relying on the GPU, and you need like a DXR, well, your GPU needs to have DXR capabilities, basically. So this makes the progress of building the light way faster. We're going to see now, I mean, this is quite a small scene, and it's not taking that much time to build, but we will see the result in a minute. So downside of this, we're going to see that on the next slide, is that it doesn't look the same if you build a scene with CPU light mask or GPU light mask. So let's wait for that to update. There you go. That will be the final scene. You could maybe get rid of some ambient occlusion, or you could try to fix, but then you will need to go again through the progress of building the light, and that's time that you're spending. So in these two renders over here, you've got that on the left image, that was built with CPU, and the right image was built with GPU. And the time that took for the CPU light mask was 46 minutes, and the time that took for the right one, which is the GPU light mask, was 16 minutes. So that one took 46, that one took 16 minutes. Obviously, when we get to the point that we need to create an environment quite quick, we need to think about everything, especially about time. Time is one of the biggest things that, well, it's kind of the only thing sometimes when we get a project, because things need to get done really, really fast. However, as you can see, the image on the left, it has a little bit more of vivid colors and the other one doesn't. Nothing that can't be changed or fixed later on in like Photoshop or something. But there's half an hour of time between one or the other one. Cool. Let's jump directly into talking about dynamic global illumination. We've got dynamic lighting. As I said, dynamic lighting is the one that you get when basically you set all the lights to movable. That's direct lighting. Then we've got ray tracing, and we're going to be talking about Lumen. I didn't add anything about path tracing because, well, path tracing has been really updated now with 5.1. If you guys don't know what's path tracing, I'm just gonna go and talk about that really quickly. Path tracing is basically a way of lighting the scene that takes a little bit of ray tracing with it, and it's updated on every frame. So basically, once you set the camera, but if you move it around, you will need to wait in order to have the scene updated. So it's not real-time-ish friendly, if that makes any sense. And basically, that's why I didn't include it on the slides. But anyway, let's continue. This is dynamic global illumination. As you can see, basically, that's the sun moving around. You can see all of the light that went from one side to the other one. Shadows were accurate, shadows were updated on the fly, etc. So that's basically dynamic global illumination, and you don't need to wait for it to build up. So, ray tracing. Basically, ray tracing, with having Lumen on the board, ray tracing is not going, I assume it's not going to be deprecated at all, but we might start to not use it as much because ray tracing has that issue about hardware, and not everyone has the option to get those GPUs, for example. So basically, the ray tracing technology has been used in film and TV shows for a long time because the way it treats light and the way it treats shadows and reflection, it's really accurate, kind of to realism. So that's been out for a while now, and there's been a lot of video games that have used ray tracing over there, and basically that's why it's been really important for the last years. So basically, the way it works is that you get all of these like rays bouncing on the different surfaces, and then with that technology, that's the real-time ray tracing, their reflections and the way the color and everything looks, it just gets completely realistic. So that's why ray tracing has been on the spot for a long time now. So let me just go a little bit further on that. So basically, the offline path that uses the build in Path Tracer generates an uncompromised rendering of the scenes, and it works seamlessly with Movie Render Queue to output the highest quality frame render. So here we're talking about cinematics as well. So, because obviously at the end of the days, we can work in all of the industries with this lighting. So that's it over there. And then we will just fully go and talk about Lumen. So Lumen, as I said, is the new fully dynamic global illumination and reflections system that is designed for next generation consoles, and it's set now as the engine's default global illumination and reflection systems. What does this mean? So basically now, if you start a project from scratch, you will find out that Lumen is on. You can change that though. You can still use any of the other ways of lighting if you want to. But basically, you will, if you actually swap a project from Unreal 4 to Unreal 5, there are a couple of things that you need to have into consideration. And we will see that later on. But first, let's talk about what does Lumen do, basically. So Lumen provides infinite diffuse bounces which merged with nanite virtualized geometry allows geometry to be more detailed. So Lumen, it's gonna work along with nanite. We need to have that in mind. And as you can see on the picture, the way that the light gets into the actual textures makes everything look even more realistic. As well, emissive materials propagate light through Lumen's final gather with no additional performance cost. This is something that it's been, well, there was before we could use screen space global illumination in Unreal 4 to get this effect, but now this is supported by default by Lumen, which means that you could even have kind of like a small scene lit with just an emissive material. But be careful because you may get some artifacts if you do so. But overall, emissive materials, they kind of behave in the way that, as you can see over here, you can have them lighting a small instance without no performance cost at all. Lumen works as well with reflections. Therefore, we can see on a reflective material the full reflection of the scene as well as its global illumination. You can see over here. And basically, in this scene that you've got over here, there is no lights. There is no sunlight, like there is no light source, there is no artificial lights, there's nothing. The only light that it's in that scene, it's basically that sphere with an emissive material. And that one over there that you can see, that's basically that's a normal sphere with a polished kind of metal that it's reflecting the whole scene. So you can see how the emissive material, it's actually shining and lighting the whole scene, and that's being reflected by that, which is not even like a mirror or anything, it's just a polished material. It does provide lower quality global illumination for lit translucency and volumetric fog, and that's something new that comes with Lumen. And let's talk about how does Lumen work, because that's something that basically we're asking about that a lot. So Lumen renders diffuse interreflection with infinite bounces and indirect specular reflections in large detailed environments at scales ranging from millimeters to kilometers. What does this mean basically? So you're going to be able to have really big environments and you will have lots of different bounces around, and that's going to be filling the whole scene. Over here you can see how even you've got some street lights, but the basic material, that one is an emissive material that you can see over there. So it does use software from ray tracing, and it does rely on mesh distance fields that they have changed a little bit since we had them in Unreal 4. And if we remember in Unreal 4, the mesh distance fields were used for getting a more accurate ambient occlusion and shadowing for static mesh actors while using ray tracing. So now they have been improved so they can match with Lumen. Good thing is they are better when we talk about performance, and they build much quicker, which is always nice. So that's basically how Lumen works. It's kind of like hybrid ray tracing with the whole global illumination working with dynamic as well. So it just updates on the fly, and it takes into account mesh distance fields as well. So, surface cache, this is something that I think we need to talk about, because basically this will change a little bit the way that we used to work. So basically, surface cache will take care of material, color, and light of the surfaces, and this will split up meshes and will capture material properties as color, roughness at a low resolution. And it will then create some kind of like atlas maps that will be used by nanite to give a more realistic view. So it works with nanite. So if you don't have a static mesh that it works with nanite in your scene, it will take longer time to recalculate those maps, which at the end will cause a performance drop. So basically what we need to change in order to make things work is that rather than working with a big, not environment, but just think about that we had like a house. So a house has like a floor, some walls, and a ceiling. Rather than just having that model completely in the scene, just as one mesh, we will need to split that into different meshes. So we will have the floor, we'll have the actual walls, and then we will have the ceiling to make it work. So that kind of changes a little bit the way we used to work. So quality control for Lumen. As I said, Lumen comes enabled by default in Unreal 5, but if you're migrating a project from Unreal 4 to Unreal 5, which I believe that most of us were still doing, there are some things that we need to take into account. So basically, the first thing we will need to do is go into the project settings and obviously enabling Lumen over there, but as well we will need to have ray lighting mode set to heat lighting for reflections, software ray tracing mode into detail tracing, and then we need to make sure that we've got generate mesh distance fields as well as RHI set to DirectX 12. And as well, virtual textures support. The rest of the magic, it's going to happen in the post-process volume. So the post-process volume is a volume that you add to your scene. Normally we do use the post-process volume, for example, for auto exposure, or just if we're working with auto exposure, you've got it over there. If not, working with manual exposure as well. You can change colors as well in the post-process volume, but all of the details that you will need to change with Lumen, they come in the post-process volume, as for example, Lumen scene lighting quality, Lumen scene detail, Lumen scene view distance, and Lumen final gather, for example. So each of those, they will take care of something. For example, the Lumen scene lighting quality in larger scales will cause the Lumen scene to be calculated with higher fidelity. Then Lumen scene details, for example, controls the size of the instances that can be calculated in a scene. And then the view distance, that will help as well with the sky shadowing for global illumination. So there's a lot of different parameters that they need to be tweaked in order to get the scene correctly lit, or at least have not a problem with performance at the end. Obviously, we've got reflections as well. So Lumen reflections, quality, scale, reflections, quality, you get them over there as well. So larger scales will reduce noise, but will increase GPU cost. And then ray lighting mode will help with reflections as well. So you've got that written over there. So once more, ray lighting mode, heat lighting for reflections. These are the ones that you should be enabling into your project settings. And don't forget about the mesh distance fields. I keep saying the mesh distance fields, but they're really important with Lumen. So basically with Lumen, we get as well to work with visualizers. These visualizers are going to help us to see how Lumen behaves, if that makes any sense. So we've got Lumen Scene, which will help you to see how Lumen looks on your scene in the highest quality available. You can see as well the surface, cache, or hardware. So you've got that set. For example, you can see how it looks on the top right, for example. You've got the reflection view, shows the top left, top right is another one. Reflection view shows the scene as Lumen reflection sees it, including limited tracing distances used by reflections, and then surface cache, that's the one in the right, is the same as Lumen scene, except that areas of meshes that were too complex to be covered are colored in pink, as you can see over there. So why do we use visualizers? We keep using visualizers, for everything, even though we don't use Lumen at all. But with this, you can actually see how accurate the lighting is getting inside your scene. So what does Lumen replace? So basically, obviously, we talk about why is Lumen better, or why should I be using one or the other one. So Lumen replaced basically skylight with ambient occlusion or unshadowed. Lumen actually improved the way the skylight looks in the scenes. So the skylight is one of the actors that we normally use in the scene in order to kind of fill in the shadows and to give a more accurate color of the light, if that makes any sense, inside our scenes. As well, it does replace the screen space global illumination, as we saw before, ray tracing global illumination, and real-time global illumination, and then third-party global illumination solutions like RTXY, so basically ray tracing global illumination. So all of that is going to be replaced by Lumen, if not it's so already. So good practices and some tips. Good practices and some tips, sorry about that. Heads up that even though a scene can be lit with an emissive material, this doesn't mean that you can do it for a whole scene. You will definitely encounter issues. So as we were seeing before, having an emissive material on a scene and using this to get some parts of the scene lit, that will be kind of like a good practice. But if you're planning to actually get a whole scene lit with the actual emissive material, that may not work that well. So base color now has a big impact in your scene. So you will definitely need to double check that twice, because the light bounces all around it, and the color from that albedo in materials will affect the overall look. So using a pure white, which is normally a value of 1, will mean that the 100% of the light from the surface, it's being bounced, which is a nonsense in nature. So basically, we shouldn't be using either 0 or 1, like pitch black or white when it comes to colors on the albedos. We still need to set all of our lights to movable. And some tips for your directional light will be that the source angle will definitely soften the shadows. So there is an option in the directional light that helps with how shadows look. And that one is the source angle. And then in a regular light, the source radio will soften the shadow. So if you work with directional light, that will be the source angle. If you work with a regular light, that will be the source radius. And now we'll go on a recap. So basically, we're going to see some differences between the pre-computed global illumination and the dynamic global illumination. So pre-computed GI, it does require time. We've seen that already. Actually, when we decide to have static lighting in our projects, we do need to count the time that it's going to take to build that light and have that done into our project. So it does require time, though with the GPU light mask, that went down a little bit. Meshes need to be prepared with their own UV light maps. We've already seen this. We need each static mesh in the scene to have its own light map. Once more, Unreal does a really good job when it comes to creating light maps, but you can have them done on another DCC if you want to. It doesn't support any changes during runtime, which at the end of the day, depending what you're aiming for, if you're, for example, doing architectural visualization, you're not going to have any kind of like changes during runtime. You will just have renders, and that's it, like static renders. So it does work okay for Archbit's projects, as you can see over there. And performance costs are relative to the memory required to load and store those light maps. You can use either the GPU or the CPU method, so you can kind of think about what you're going for. You get good natural lighting results. That's really true. I mean, I'm not saying with dynamic you don't get those nice results, but most of the time, it's if you can build or you can bake the light in a scene, I will recommend that because it looks way more natural. And it doesn't always require high-end machines. It does depend, though. If we're going for the GPU light mask, you might need to have, you do need an RTX. And that's for pre-computed global illumination. Then dynamic global illumination, it's good for large scenes where there are meshes moving around. So obviously, as we said, this is lighting that gets updated on the fly. So basically, it's good for any kind of animations you've got. It's good for cinematics, for example. And it's good as well if you're going to be changing stuff in, like moving around stuff in runtime. What you see is what you get. Basically, you don't need to bake the light. So if you move the sun from one side to the other one, or you change the color of the light, that's going to update on the fly. It allows creatives to have more control over the lighting in the scene. That's true, because depending on the industry you work in, you may have, and I'm gonna talk about the background I know, sometimes when we get directors that come and see the environments that we're actually going to put on the volumes, on the LED volumes to shoot, they love to see how lighting gets updated on the fly. And not just on the screen though, as well on the wall. So you don't need to spend that time and telling them, look, we need to wait for the scene to build. Good thing about dynamic global illumination, Lumen, obviously. Performance costs are relative to the method that is being used. So you can have ray tracing or Lumen. Bear in mind that Lumen doesn't need an RTX to work. However, if you've got it, it's welcome. It will take advantage of that as well. You will sometimes need to trade quality for performance, and obviously it's quicker because once more, what you see is what you get, basically. So after that, I want you guys to think what you will be using. And obviously, going back to what we said at the beginning, you've got that it depends on the time that you've got to build your project. It depends what's your project for, and it depends what you're aiming for. So with that in mind, you should still be thinking that if you're going to go for static lighting or dynamic lighting. Thanks.